good evening, everyone. We are going to talk about preparing multilingual pupils for standardized testing and examinations in geography. So, as we know, the GCSE curriculum for geography requires quite a lot of skills: cartographic, graphical, numerical, statistical. The use of data, students need to formulate inquiry and argument, and they also need to be advanced at literacy. So there are quite a lot of skills to learn. But how do EAL students learn? So depending on the level, and I've used the Bell Foundation scale to present different levels here, depending on students' level, they will be learning different styles. They will be needing different types of questions. They will be able to present work at different levels. And they also need to be able to develop their skills, 4 skills during lessons such as listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Therefore, having the opportunity to hear, see, say, write down words or phrases or lesson content, use vocabulary in sentences, and explain processes and new content is absolutely crucial. So the learning steps in this presentation are, as on the screen you can see, there are 12 steps. So I'm going to start with teaching vocabulary, and I'm going to guide you through different steps to get to the level of independent learning. And the question here is how to prepare the most vulnerable pupils, those who can't speak English, those who join the course in the middle of the school. So let's imagine we have a year 10 pupil. That person has missed most of the program so far. Maybe they've never studied geography before, and also they can't speak English. So how to prepare that person to pass the test later, just in a year? And I think what's important to remember that although we have someone who doesn't speak English now, 1 year is quite a long period of time. And in 1 year, those pupils may be able to develop literacy skills. The English will be much more advanced, at least in theory. So what I'm going to focus the most is how to teach students that knowledge, how to present that curricular skills, curricular knowledge that needs to be presented later in standardized examinations. And this is with the idea of someone who can speak English. We assume that because of the progress over the year of the English skills, they will be able to develop this knowledge even further. So we are going to start with teaching vocabulary, the basics. And I'd like you to have a look at the screen and try to remember, I'll give you 30 seconds for that, try to remember as many words as you can from the list. So obviously in the classroom, we would have more time for that. So how many words can you remember? And what we'll be learning about today? So teaching vocabulary may be actually a fun adventure, may be interesting, may introduce the topic as well. It's a good start to the theme as well. So teaching vocabulary may happen in many different ways. So for example, in my previous school, we had a vocabulary strategy where vocabulary was always displayed. So displaying the key vocabulary on the board, they were a lot of stating the meaning, talking about meaning. Students had to explain vocabulary. They were then underlining the key vocabulary in red, and they also had to write sentences, and they were asked to say sentences during lessons. So the development of oracy was also taking place. And you have an example on the screen. Every student received a vocabulary mat that was found on TES. And as you see, there are different topics here. It was extremely useful during lessons because students could refer to these topics during every session. but also before the new topic started, they were asked to write down definitions, translations, maybe find pictures. So it was prior learning before the actual topic started. And when those students were coming back to lesson, they could interactively participate in lessons because they had the idea of the key vocabulary. And this is another form of presenting vocabulary mat. So you could add pictures, but also short definitions, such as pictures or even simple questions. So thanks to that, we teach students how to use vocabulary mat. So they are not only resources that are put on the table for the use, but we show them, we model the way of using such vocabulary mats. Another way, using flashcards. So obviously we've got that visualized presentation. Here we have key vocabulary to remind. And again, it's just having that prompt during lesson that students can refer to vocabulary as they see it. So labeling and fill in the gaps tasks. So as you see, you've got 5 pictures. Students are asked to label the picture. And if we have someone who is new to English, I think it's extremely effective because they can actively take part in the lesson, at least with the start. And then we have some fill in the gaps words. Again, it's fun, it's entertaining, and it gets students involved into using key vocabulary, geographical vocabulary, which, as I mentioned before, can be developed into sentences later. These are examples of vocabulary books. So the mat that I showed with glossaries, again, that could be corresponded. So we had students who had the list of vocabulary. They could write definitions in books like that. So a great way for pre-teaching, writing, but also later for revision before tests or exams. Lesson preparation homework. So these are visual examples of what our students did when they were preparing the definitions. So some of them were writing definitions, some others were using pictures. And again, when they came back to lesson with such knowledge, even they could be asked about definitions of subwords. So for teachers, there's also an opportunity to address any misconceptions, to get the students to actively answer questions. Word formation, I think, is a very important aspect. When we teach vocabulary, when we present what prefixes and suffixes mean, so students later can implement that knowledge and decode unfamiliar words because they already are aware of the meaning of prefixes such as geo or suffix logi. So we've got a definition that can be later transferred into other words as well. When we've taught vocabulary, we can start implementing visuals. And as you see the examples here, they present that illustrations that were taken from geographical books, but I think quite often they don't prompt imagination. And when we offer students the real-life pictures, they can use their prior knowledge, or they can refer to those graphs in a different way. They become much more familiar to them. They can memorize them better. So as you see, there was the task here on the left-hand side to label the picture. So they had to use the illustration taken from book, and they had to match the vocabulary, the pictures, the parts of the illustration with a real-life photograph. And exactly the same method was used here, where they had pictures with definitions, with labels provided, and how interesting it is to actually find the same parts of the illustrations on real life photographs. And I think, again, it's just much easier to talk about pictures that are much more understandable for anyone, not only about illustrations, that quite often it's hard to match them with a real life situation. So over here, we've got more ideas. We've got definitions or prompts. So the aim here is to make students more independent. So when you've got key vocabulary such as strength of swash, you've got a prompting question, how strong? And again, swash, you've got an arrow that shows to the beach. And then if you've got the strength of backwash, going back. So those arrows are helping to understand the concepts, and they help to memorize. And an example with some students' work. So what's important here is that those similar resources, they are actively practiced by students. They have questions. So it's not just math with words that we can look at, but they also have questions. They ask students to actively use them. So although there is a definition provided of the word dissolving, there is an additional question, what is solution? Because the key point here is how students understand these definitions. Because it's easy to read them, but this is another level to actually use their own words to explain the process. And those must help in such task. Dual coding in geography specifically, I know that dual coding can be used in many different ways. I think the most effective ways is if it's used consistently across all the lessons, and every time when we talk about, for example, economic, we use the same symbol. As an alternative, students can present their own symbols, and it may also help them memorize the terms better. And again, we've got more visuals here. And I think what we have to remember that we can use such visuals in many different ways. So for example, we can ask about matching pictures to definitions first. We can ask students to write them down as another step. So there are many different variations of using illustrations that are student-friendly. We go to writing first sentences. Writing first sentences, again, we've got a math that is helpful. So we speak here about physical features, what can we see, and answers, potential answers are provided. So we've got landscape, area of land and its features, you've got examples over here. And if you can see in the corner, now then students were given illustrations where they had to use the vocabulary provided to describe those pictures. So they already had prompts, which were extremely helpful because it's just a way of using them and identifying the same features in the pictures. And this is more advanced. So we've taken out all the illustrations. There are only questions. Excellent prompts for speaking as well. So for example, working in pairs, where there are definitions provided. So students still have that prompt and they can actively participate in a task. Guided writing. So guided writing is a similar idea as in reference as is used in guided reading, where we explain firstly what the sentence may refer to. So for example, we can explain what the graphs present. We call it a figure, so students know that they need to use this term. And then we give them, for instance, 30 seconds so they can write their own answer, and so on. So the idea of having guided writing refers to time management, to guiding students what to write, just to model that thinking, how to look at graphs, and obviously later they can do it by themselves. Analyzing exam questions. So we are at step 4. So we start expecting more. So we've got a question here, how can we reduce desertification in hot deserts? And as you see, there is a format of a table. And I think this is crucial because using tables helps in memorizing concepts. I think it's very, very clear. Sometimes tables are much more clearer than text themselves. So we've got the question and we've got answers. So we go straight to the point. And what we want the students is to remember the answers. I've got the numbers here. It's also easier to remember that if I got this question, I have to remember about 6 answers. So obviously those words, those definitions are explained here. You've got pictures. So for a child, let's imagine we have someone who speaks very little English. That could be a task for some time just to memorize, to understand those definitions. But when we ask the question, and obviously the concept of the certification should be explained as well, we have at least some prompts to understand the question. As I mentioned before, those answers can be developed later in terms of literacy. So practicing oracy. So if we look at this definition here, so the task is to repeat it 3 times. So we've got the definition, we've got pictures, so we get our students to repeat it loudly. And the next step is to repeat it again. And when they said it 2 times, repeat it again. And it's getting harder and harder and harder. So that might be a really fun activity, probably just to increase that level of energy, a little brainstorm. I know that children really like competitions, so it may be fun. But also, I think the crucial factor here is to use speaking skills, develop the ability to actually pronounce these words correctly as well. And recording. So another idea here is, in terms of oracy practice, is to record key vocabulary. So nowadays, with so many options for recording and the technology all over, it's easy to ask students to record vocabulary, bring it as their homework. That may work as well. You may ask them about something more advanced. So for example, read these words out and provide definitions, and so on. And they can send you a recorded version, or they can bring the equipment to you and play it to you. So again, they are actively involved in memorizing the vocab. Advancing listening skills. So what can we do while teacher talk? While teacher talks, students can follow up the given text, highlight words within the text. So that could be a task. So for example, a teacher has a presentation and the task for the students is to highlight the specific word that is mentioned. Fill in the gaps, obviously, answer yes, no questions, write numbers that they were mentioned, put sentences in the correct order. That might be also a fun activity. We are moving on into developing reading skills. So again, we've got definitions about weathering, and we've got very clear examples. So we've got different types of weathering. Then we've got definitions, and now they are explained in terms of keywords, and pictures. So then you have questions around this table. What do we call scree? So again, we get students to actively think about these resources, these simplified resources. And they have questions, so you can very quickly check if they have understood the concept just from this extremely simplified resource. And again, we have another example. We have a longer text on the left-hand side, and exactly the same text is put into a table. And that's what I meant, that it's easier to read tables because they are much more student-friendly. They organize definitions into some kind of system. It's easier to remember, to notice some patterns. And again, we've got questions. So what are causes of desertification in hot deserts? So we've got the definition, and the arrows here, they present that those simplified versions, they can be for students who are at lower levels, and those longer versions can be used by more advanced. So you've got one resource that can be used by all students in the classroom. And it of course this can be used in pairs. So for example, one person asks another about definition or providing more detail. And it's again used in a very simplified way, student-friendly, and focus on very specific concept of the question. So the information is extremely simplified. So we've got an example taken from a curricular book. So you see what such resource looks like, how texts are presented. And this is how we can adapt exactly the same text, the same illustrations, and the same concept. So we've got another question. What are opportunities for development in hot deserts? So let's start with key vocabulary. I think this is the key here. Write your definitions. Next, we put the same text into shorter chunks. So it's easier to focus on one concept at a time. So we've got a scanning activity, questions directed to the same text. So those questions don't refer to every single concept that was presented in that part, but just to this one, which refers to tourism. Again, we've got a quick recap. What's farming before? So we check the prior knowledge. And we've got a quick task. Read and highlight these words. Farming, grazing, animals. So we concentrated focus on, again, key vocabulary within the text. And then we have another activity to fill in the gaps. Visual coding, so we have picture. And again, we've got this visual prompt and we ask a question. And based on the text, we have even more questions here. And we repeat exactly the same task. So I think for those students who can't speak English, they probably benefit more from very repetitive system. So it's easier to understand them that, oh, I have been shown how to complete this task. So now I can do the next one independently because I know the system. And we repeat the same. So you see it's similarly organized. Highlight these words, fill in the gaps, and so on. So now we've got an example of organizing a summary. So we had the same question at the beginning, and now we use a table which again, I think it creates targets for students as well. So we've got what are opportunities for development in hot deserts. So we've got those 4 categories such as tourism, farming, energy, mineral extraction. And then we've got the definitions. And I think providing numbers helps to understand what the target is. We've got a goal presented here. And if we've got a summary presented like that, it's very easy to work on it in terms of students can read it out loud. They can present it to the class. It's easier to remember. It could be a resource that is later used for writing. So there are many opportunities to work with this document itself. We've got a very similar example here. Again here. So we've got the definition, pictures, and these are, let's call them common sense questions. What happens when you do too much irrigation? So it's just to get students to think, to use their prior knowledge, to think, so they think about geographical concepts, but in reference to what they already know. So when is salt bad for the ground? So we try to prompt them with simple questions to understand higher level concepts. And we are moving on, and these are examples of what students were writing. So even if they write a simple answer such as no, it's a reaction. It's the response to the text. And as you see, key vocabulary is highlighted here. And again, another example. And after all of that, we can have a game again. So your learner has prepared that summary, has read the text, so you can provide again and ask, so what is missing, for example. Now we are going to focus on writing, step 9. So again, we provide key vocabulary, as you see, visual table. We've got definitions, we've got labels. So we provide prompts before writing. We've got illustrations. We've got visualized presentation here. Vocabulary is provided. And we have sentence status for scaffolding. So we have a very clear instructions here. So where's introduction? How to describe? What can we use if numbers are going up? And again, this can be modeled. I think modeling it once is enough. Students can refer to such resource later independently. If we have a text, so it could be modeled. Students can also work on provided answers. So they practice scanning that they already know. And they write, what is the title of the graph? So they have to identify it in the modeled answer. And scaffolding. So we provide sentence frames and we ask our pupils to read graph by themselves. Step 10, revising. So again, we are coming back to the use of tables. So this was used before. It's a fantastic method to revise. Students can ask each other. It's easy to check if they work in pairs. If we use any collaborative methods, they can ask each other for answers. They can ask each other to write down those answers, to check the spelling. And it's so much easier to work on such personalized resources than on longer texts. Building confidence, a very important step. When we've done our revising, we should also practice speaking. And I think with similar resources, we can ask students to prepare short presentations. Even if they stand and they read 6 simple points or definitions, that's a step forward, and they've been given an opportunity to use geographical vocabulary in lessons. And from my own experience, I know how proud those students who couldn't speak English, but they had that opportunity to present in front of everybody, how proud they were. So obviously, an excellent method for revising and learning. And they can also do the same in small groups. It doesn't have to be a big class. If you have teaching assistants, that could be an opportunity for them to take a small group, go outside the classroom, practice speaking, then come back to the class, present, and I'm sure that confidence can be easily built by that. Step 12, independent learning. So when we've done all of that, we should motivate students to use all the resources that they have to practice and memorize the knowledge that they've gained. So this is an app, Keywords Geography, which is specifically designed for ESOL students, so English for speakers of other languages. And over here, not only that you have curricular topics, as there is an example, what you can find: play, movement, climate types, atmosphere. There are games around vocabulary and those topics. Students can record the pronunciation of vocabulary. They can fill in the gaps. So there is quite a lot to do in this game. It's really good. The next one is GCSE Geography Revision, where there are many dictionaries, flashcards, many topics are explained. So that's another source for revision, for practice. Knowledge organizers, again, they very briefly present all the information. Excellent resource. Practice, time management. We cannot forget about that. Extremely important. Students need to be given assessments. They need to be aware of time. And even when I come back to the idea of guided writing, that may be a good start. Thank you very much. This is the end of the presentation.